All right. The next case in this line, like I said, takes place in the same year as Sweat v. Painter, and that's McClaurin versus Oklahoma State Board of Regents. So Oklahoma, not like Texas, a little different from Texas in this case, did admit African Americans to its law school. So it did take that first step. But it segregated African American students from white students by assigning them specific seating in places like classes, library, cafeteria, and any sort of other sort of common venue that the law school provided. And so the question in this case is, was segregation within the law school a violation of the Equal Protection Clause? Now understand, this is a very different case to make than Sweat v. Painter. Sweat v. Painter basically said is, okay, you have two different accommodations. Are they equal? In this case, you have one accommodation, University of Oklahoma Law School. But within the law school, even though the classes were the same, the library was the same, the cafeteria was the same, African Americans were segregated in all of those venues. And the case that McClaurin attempts to make with help of the NAACP is that systematic segregation is not equal treatment. And so the question is whether segregation within the environment is a violation of the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Now, you should not be shocked that in order to make this case, in order to make this argument, they had to point almost entirely at intangible factors. There weren't a lot of quantitative factors for the attorneys to point to. So in particular, the court argues that African Americans' ability to study, engage in discussions and exchange with other students, and in general learn his profession were being at least halved by requiring those students to be segregated from other students. And that is a violation of equal protection. That you can't have a robust legal environment, a legal education, in which some students are prohibited from interacting with other students, even if the lecture is the same, and even if access to the library is the same, and even if eating in the cafeteria is the same food. By segregating white students and African American students, you were devaluing the type of legal education that those African American students were getting, because they were not being allowed to engage in a full, robust debate, an environment of learning in which exchange was equally taking place amongst all students. And so these intangibles get even more, well, important in this case. And this is just one of the areas in which the NAACP sort of goes headlong in. They attack it in terms of graduate and professional education, law school being a professional education, but graduate education, they attack it in terms of law schools. And the strategy is very much, the strategy that they used in law schools is very much the same strategy they used in medical schools. Some of the earliest medical cases, cases that took place about segregation in medical schools, were about the fact that medical students in African American medical schools didn't have access to very basic necessities of the trade, some of them being things as simple as cadavers. Whereas the white schools had access to cadavers, African American students didn't. And so there was a circumstance in which you could graduate from medical school as an African American student without have ever seen the inside of a human body. Those sort of quantitative differences are really easy to prove. Then, just like happened in this case, just like happened in Sweat v. Painter, you stack on these intangible qualities as well. And so we now have a buttress of precedent demonstrating that separate but equal in these sort of graduate and professional schools at the highest levels of higher education are inherently unequal if there's any form of segregation that's going on. So the NAACP has set the stage for what they're going to do, and has built up this train of precedent that will allow them to take the next logical step in the argument that they're making.